Hello, Metro Fire. As we discussed throughout the fire service and being a public agency, our number one asset is our people. I've got to give credit to where credit is due. Captain Malinowski came to me with an idea, a brainstorm, about how do we capture the knowledge of our people. I hope you find these series rewarding, informational, and with a touch of humanity. I want to thank Jeff Malinowski for a great idea, his time, his efforts, and really capturing the knowledge of our people before they exit our great agency we call Metro Fire. Thank you.
The fire service is a lifestyle. Some of us grew up knowing that this is what we would do. Others found it later in life. We all have a story to tell. We live a career of experience and knowledge. But what happens when we retire? All that knowledge and experience walks out the door. Welcome to Capture the Knowledge.
My fire service experiences really started as a child. I was somebody that knew I wanted to be a firefighter my whole life. My parents have told me that that's all I talked about from the time I could talk. I tested with Sacramento City twice, unfortunately never scored high enough on the list. I tested with some other organizations and again just never scored well enough. Through the reserve program, there was a small group of us that the program reached out to. The American River Fire District at that time had just merged with Slough House, and as part of the Slough House merger agreement, they were allowed to hire some part-time staffing for the first 2 years of that merger agreement. American River Fire was looking for people that had some experience that could go out there. They reached out to the Sacramento Fire Reserves knowing that we had that Firefighter 1 program and had some qualifications and some training.
Right.
So we were offered the opportunity to participate in a competitive test with a limited amount of people for what was at that time promised a 1-year commitment to a position called hourly firefighter. So we tested for that. Unfortunately, I was successful in that testing process and was offered an opportunity to come to work for the American River Fire District as an hourly firefighter. They told us up front that there was no guarantee of employment after that 1 year. I actually, at the time, was working for a plumbing company as a laborer, and it was a cut in pay for me to come here to be a firefighter from what I was getting paid digging ditches in a plumbing company.
Yeah.
30 years later, I will tell you it was the best decision I've ever made.
Right.
So came here, went through an academy. There was it was a mixed academy. There was 10 of us total in the academy. 6 of us were hourly firefighters. The other 4 were going to be full-time firefighter paramedics. Our academies were not any different. We worked side by side with our full-time counterparts. The only difference was when we were done with the academy, the 6 of us that were hired as hourlies went out to either Station 58 or 59 and spent the next about 10 months out there essentially. The 4 folks that were firefighter paramedics got to work in the 100 series stations at the time. So fortunately, a year later, we were offered a full-time position with American River Fire, and we all transitioned into those spots, and then that's when our probation began. So at the time, American River had an 18-month probation. And so, essentially my probation was 2.5 years because we were on probation as hourlies.
Right.
Then we got this full-time position and probation started all over again. So 2.5 years later, probation was over and the career continued to progress. Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. We have an opportunity to mold our people that way and get a hold of them early and really show them what Metro Fire is about, really help try and establish the culture. There's a lot of talk about the culture of the fire service, but really what's going to build that culture is the people. It's not something that the fire chief can decide is going to happen, or even one firehouse. You have these little subcultures that exist within the department, but the culture really is just the people. And you have to just kind of let it blossom on its own. I think the true core is everybody that's here wants to be here because they want to help people. And I know it sounds really corny, but that's really why we're all here. We didn't come here to just hang out. We have a desire to help people. I think sometimes it gets lost in the frustrations that come along with the job. I mean, you see a lot. Some of us have worked in busy firehouses for long times, and it can wear on you.
Yeah.
But deep down inside, ultimately, the reason we're all here is because we want to be able to help people in one way or another. the reality of it is, I think most of us signed up to go fight fires. But the fact of the matter is, we all knew coming into this that that's only a small portion of the job. So dealing with people is really what the big part of this job is. I think that's really why we're all here. I mean, I don't know why else somebody would spend 30 years of their life here,
Right.
if they didn't really have some desire to do it. That it's always going to be a challenge. Everybody's different.
A lot of headaches, huh?
It can be. It can be a headache if that's what you want it to be, or you can look at it as an ability to be a problem solver. And again, you know, I think as you work through your career, you go through different phases. I think we've all been in the phase where, you know, when we start new, we're all excited to be here. We're happy to help people. And then over time, it wears at you, especially when you see, I think all of us have an expectation of what we consider an emergency.
Right.
And unfortunately, the people that we go out and provide service to, what they consider an emergency might be far different than what we see as an emergency.
Sure.
And so I think there's some frustrations that develop with that. And I think then that creates some challenges for all of us at some point in our career.
Yeah.
And I think really what you have to do is sit back and look at it and realize that, yes, maybe it's not an emergency to us, but that's not for us to decide necessarily. Again, we chose a service profession. We need to provide the service to help them through that crisis at the time.
Right.
I think you really just have to learn some patience. Some of it's going to test you to your wits' end at times. You got to learn how to manage those frustrations. Ultimately, yeah, we're here to help people. And if you don't want to believe that, then I think the folks that don't really want to help people, they really should maybe reflect on themselves a little bit and see if this is really the right career for them. There are times in this career where you are going to make a true difference to somebody. And it can be small things, the silliest things to some people. The cat in the tree call. You know what? For some child, that cat might be their whole world right now. And when you go and get that cat out of the tree and that child's smiling from ear to ear, those are the wins. When we've successfully rescued somebody's pet out of a fire, or saved a belonging of theirs that has a special value to them. The medical aids where we truly made a difference. You know, we saved somebody's life. Lots of little things, even small things that a lot of people wouldn't look at. But when you go on the emergency and you transport a family member, and the family member that's remaining on scene doesn't have the ability maybe to get to the hospital to be with their loved one, and we've made arrangements either by taking them in one of our apparatus or been able to find a family member or somebody that can, or a neighbor or whatever, that can get that person there to be with their loved one. Those are the wins.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I think ultimately deep down make us all feel good when we're able to do those. Most of us are pretty humble about that. We don't generally admit it. It's just part of what we do and who we are. For me personally, those are what I would consider the wins. I don't know that I can pick a single mentor. I've had so many over the nearly 30 years here and 35 plus years in the fire service. There's lots of them. I would say a lot of the ones that were earlier in my career, like I talked about earlier, they were the foundation of some of the names I can think of within the organization that some of the other folks would even know probably today. Captain Brian Rice. He was my captain. When I got hired full time here. He had just been promoted. He was a probationary captain. I was his probationary firefighter. We worked through probation together. Very stern, very firm in the way he did stuff, but very fair. To this day, I have a lot of respect for Brian because he was just a solid individual and was going to let me make the mistakes that you need to make as a new guy and correct them in the right manner. You know, there was a couple times I put my foot in my mouth as a probationary firefighter, and there was consequences to be had. You know, I usually walked away with a little bit of a sore spot on your backside after your captain had a piece of it. They were all earned. I can't ever say that Brian would have scolded me, and maybe scold is not the right word, but redirected my mouth or my behavior. But every one of them was earned. I mean, along with that, I worked with Captain Jeff Wild. Back then it was Captain Cameron and Captain Woodward, Captain Dan Frank. These guys were all, Captain Dave Smith, they all put a lot of effort into me, I felt, to help better me through my career, help me achieve the different goals I was looking for in my career. And like I said, there's really just too many to name. Those are just some of the ones that pop into my mind right off the top of my head.
Right.
There's still guys to this day that are my mentors within this organization and outside this organization. I think nobody needs to have a single mentor. I think there's a ton of information and growth available to all of us in this organization, and it comes from everybody. Everybody's got different talents and assets and drawbacks, and we can learn from all of those.
Sure.
And to just truly pick out just a couple of them, like I said, I think the reason those names stick out so much to me is they had a lot of influence on me at specific times in my career. Most of those guys during my probation, Dan Frank and Dave Smith, they stand out to me because as I wanted to start working as an engineer, for example, they're the ones that took the time out of their days to go out and run me consistently through training exercises to be proficient as an engineer.
Yeah.
And like I said, I know there's others that I'm missing, and I hopefully they can forgive me for not mentioning their names, but
Sure.
yeah, there's so many, and it should never end. I think probably one of the hardest calls I've run, and I think probably most people are going to tell you this, is the calls you deal with small children. When I was much younger, and I believe it was my daughter had been born, went on a pediatric CPR one morning. This was back before we had all ALS companies, before we had our own ambulances. Pull up on a BLS engine company to mom doing CPR on her unresponsive infant. She's pregnant. There's other small kids there. Dad's trying to manage these other kids. When she handed that child over to me, I took over CPR. And like I said, we were a BLS engine company, pretty limited to what we could do. I was an acting captain at the time. I'm trying to find out where the ambulance is because there's not a whole lot we're doing for this child. I couldn't get that kid in the ambulance fast enough and get that kid to the hospital, unfortunately knowing the true reality that there probably was nothing we were going to do. Then I got back to the firehouse and that initial adrenaline wore off, and then you start to reflect on your own situation. I had a child at home that about the same age, and it really hit home. And that was one of those moments that you're kind of like, oh crap, this really hit home.
Yeah.
And I needed a little bit of time on my own to just reflect and work through that. I think today, I think we have the ability to deal with that a little bit differently. Back then, obviously, we didn't talk about our feelings, behavioral health. None of that was an issue.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those things that's changed in the fire service over the years that I've been involved. Is we've recognized now that this mental health piece is so vitally important for all of us, and so I think that would have been the way it would have been dealt with now compared to then is much different. We would have come back as a group, sat and talked about it. I think it would have probably been a little easier to swallow in the end.
Right. Yeah, and it takes time to swallow those, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that call was probably 20 years ago now, and it still is vivid today as it was the day that I ran that call. Let's see. There's a few. I'm trying to think of one in particular though that really stands out. I mean, we all have. The funny ones don't stick with you. I don't think nearly as much because they don't have that same impact as the calls that are the more serious ones. So I think it's hard to single out a specific funny call. I mean, there's been so many little things over the career. I did have an engineer at one point though that I won't say any names. We'll let the some people remain anonymous. But I had an engineer that wasn't a fan of birds. We get dispatched to an animal rescue call for a bird stuck in a chimney of a house. We go inside and you can hear the bird making noise up in the flue of the fireplace. And the firefighter and I threw a ladder to the roof and we went up and assessed from the top to figure out, okay, is there something that's impeding this bird's ability to get out or whatever, while the engineer went inside. We weren't up there very long, and pretty soon we heard the engineer, hey guys, you want to get down here? Well, the bird was getting down closer to him, and he didn't like that part. So, there's events like that. You find out a lot about the people you work with over the years because
we sure do.
People have different phobias, and we all have them to some extent. You just might not always know what it is until somebody exposes it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of funny stuff that happens, but I think more of it is not necessarily on the calls. I think it's what happens in the firehouse and when we're interacting with each other. Those are really the fun times. And I think that part is so vital for us, again, for that mental health piece, for us to survive through all the negative that we see on this job. That part of our job is so vital. It really is. As I progressed into being a company officer and now chief officer, that time you spend with your crew is really your gauge of where everybody's at. That time in the morning, I was very fortunate. I had crews and people that worked with me for very long periods of time. I had an engineer that spent 13 years with me. I've had firefighters that spent, extended long periods of time with me. You get to the point that you can tell when they show up for work, if they're having a good day or a bad day. We're all human. And so we're all going to have the same problems that everybody else outside this job has. And I think sometimes we forget that. We can't forget it because the same problems that impact everybody else are going to impact us too. And that gives you an opportunity to kind of gauge, okay, do I need to have a conversation with this guy and just make sure that we're good? Maybe they need to talk. Right. And so I would say that, yeah, cell phones are the introduction of cell phones into the firehouse definitely has changed the dynamic of how things work in the firehouse. But I think, one, the company officers need to keep their folks engaged so that people don't go hide. I mean, Jeff, you've probably worked at some of those stations over your career where you get there and, yeah, there's 3 people or 5 people that work at that station. There are 5 people that work at a firehouse. They are not a 5-person crew or a 3-person crew. And I will tell you that those are very awkward environments to work in. I might not be the most social person to begin with, but when I come to work, I've always made it a point to spend time with my crew, whether on overtime, my regular crews, whatever, because it is important that we have to depend on each other. We're trusting our lives on each other. We need to know each other to some extent. Now, do I need to know every intimate detail of what goes on in your family's life at home? No. Some of us have that relationship. Not all of us are going to. As company officers, we need to make sure that we're not allowing our guys to just disappear, guys and gals, to just disappear and hide in their dorm space or wherever it is. Personally, I think, unfortunately, I guess now we can't just not have cell phones. So much of our lives are dependent on them, and it's for everything we do. But it would be nice to see that at the end of dinner, that when we have our quote family time, that not everybody's just staring at a cell phone, that we're actually interacting and having conversation.
Yeah, sharing some stories from the day and
that talking about
some joke time.
What we did on our 4-day. A lot of us have some common interests, so let's talk about the stuff we did on our 4-day that was fun. Because again, we're all human. We all have the same stuff going on in our lives outside of here.
Yeah.
So there are common interests, and it doesn't all have to be based on social media or what's for sale on Craigslist right now. I'm pretty humble about it. I'm not one that has to go and talk about that I'm a firefighter. I know what it means to me, and it means that I'm getting to live my childhood dream. And still, my dream, obviously, as an adult, I'll be honest with you, I still have a ton of fun. Obviously, I don't get to ride around on a fire engine anymore, but even in the battalion chief buggy, when I get to drive Code 3, there's still something about that brings out that inner child. Yeah. That's that fun part of this, one of those fun parts of the job. Yes, I'm very proud of the fact that if I do have that discussion with somebody that, yes, I'm a firefighter, but I'm not one that's going to necessarily brag about it. I think you have to earn a spot for me to trust you enough to get into the more intimate parts of what it means for me to be a firefighter. Yeah. So it's not something I just generally share with people. I will tell you probably the biggest thing I see right now within our organization, and it's the fire service, I think, everywhere right now, at least in the United States, is this culture change due to so many people being similar in age. When I started, the senior guys, whether they were the captains or senior firefighters, were easily 15 to 20 years older than I was. There was a group of us that were all similar in age, but those captains and those chief officers were definitely at a much higher level of age. We don't have that anymore. I walk into a firehouse and everybody might be of the same generation, within a few years of each other, from the captain to the probationary firefighter. So there's not a whole lot of age differences. So I think that it creates some challenges for our folks, because now it's harder if you have to deal with like a disciplinary type issue, because these guys are probably all your friends.
Yeah.
They're not just a coworker. So I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of folks as we move forward as an organization. We're all so close. There's not that separation. And unfortunately with this, we have a ton of inexperience, and it's across the board again, because we've got so many people that just don't have that same amount of time on the job. And the people on the top end that had all the experience have retired, and there hasn't been a good mechanism to pass that information on. We all have little bits and pieces of information that we know about certain areas that we may have worked for a long time. I spent a long time at Engine 24, and I know stuff that's intimate about 24's first in that there's not a good way for us to share it with everybody necessarily. So when I get an opportunity and I can share it with somebody that now works there, I do that. Until we can come up with a way to take all the knowledge out of my head and stick it in somebody else's, I don't know how we're going to ever have the ability to share all of that knowledge that we lose. Remember that your career here is a marathon, it's not a sprint. You don't have to go out and take every specialty class there is in your first 5 years here. Set your goals for your career, and obviously you can revise those as you need to. Start off learning to be good at your job. Learn how to be a good firefighter before you decide you want to be an engineer or a captain. As you achieve those different milestones in your career, strive to be good at each of them. There's a lot of opportunity out there. Don't expect the department to do everything for you. Have some motivation, have some initiative. Go out and make yourself the best employee you can be for the organization. And I don't care if it's here or any place or any other place that you might work. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Don't discredit the other guys that have information for you. Maybe you'll have to filter out what's good and what's bad.
Right.
But everybody's got something to offer you. Be a sponge, absorb it all, and occasionally you might have to wring it out to make some space for some of this stuff, because you're going to figure out who those individuals are that have the good information and the ones that are full of crap ultimately. Yeah. So sometimes you got to wring that sponge out and make room for more information. It's a marathon. Don't try and do everything. Spread it out over your career. Stay engaged through your whole career. That level of engagement doesn't have to be where you're the guy that's going to stand out in front of everybody. It's okay to not be the center of attention and yet still be involved and be engaged and keep moving the organization forward. My desire to do what's right for this organization, I don't think is any different today than it was when I started. Yeah, there's been periods of time over the career where that level of motivation wanes a little bit, and you may not be as engaged, and that's okay. Sometimes you need those breaks.
Yeah.
But ultimately now the responsibility that I feel that I have, and a ton of it's self-imposed when I went on into my current day assignment, is that my day doesn't necessarily end when I go home. I have a take-home vehicle, I have a take-home telephone. In my mind, this organization gave me the responsibility that if that phone rings, that I need to answer it.
Right.
And like I said, that's self-imposed. That's just what my work ethic is. My work ethic was the same when I was a firefighter. It was the same when I was a captain. If work called, frequently I dropped what I was doing, because that is what I believed, and still to this day believe, of what the fire service is. I get it. Not everybody thinks of this job the same way, and that's okay. Again, we're individuals. We have to have some of that balance. It might be that circumstance where, okay, we just sent a 5-engine strike team out. I was the one that always called down. Okay, maybe it had a little bit to do with some of my greed, but I was the guy that would call staffing ahead of time. I had heard that the strike team was going, so I'd be the guy that would call staff and say, "Hey, I'm available to work."
Yeah.
That's just how. That's just how I was. And again, sometimes we need those people.
Yeah.
And you're right. It can also be the little things, taking that little bit extra on a call, just being that nice person, helping some elderly lady that you just picked up off the floor put her groceries away, for example.
Right.
Those are all things that we can do that are going to make us better in the end and make this organization even better than it is today.
Well, it ties into the common theme as we close this interview out. It ties into our common theme of people, taking care of people.
Absolutely.
We circle back around to where we started, and I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Chief Fiorica, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming out and meeting with me today, and we're going to get this into the Fire Department Connection, capturing your knowledge. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff.